Yeah.
We're setting records here. This is the most people we've ever had over these. So thank you for coming. Bringing up the presentation. So welcome to the May 2023 Community Budget Workshop. My name is Greg Hart. I'm the Executive Director of Finance and Business Services for Clover Park School District. This evening, we will be presenting some budget information based on the community feedback we received this spring. So here's tonight's agenda. We'll spend some time reviewing the district's funding resources. We'll review next steps in the budget process. We'll share some input we received from the community this spring. And for those in attendance, we'll have a table conversations at the end. So try the other. That works. This is just as a reminder. Here's the vision of the Clover Park School District. And here are the 6 goals of the Board of Directors. So let's start off by looking at the budget timeline. We won't go into too much detail on everything shown here. What we're really trying to illustrate here is that the budget development is a year-round process. A lot of the heavy lifting happens during the spring, and the board votes to adopt the budget in the summer. Then we restart the whole process. And the board has been at this since January and February of this year. So we've had a number of updates to the board. So they have been informed a number of times already. And we just build this process from month to month. So here is the schedule for the development of next year's budget. A few highlights. We held 2 community budget workshops in March. We recently launched a thought exchange survey to the community to gain more insight into priorities to support student learning. We'll review the results of that survey in the upcoming slides. We'll hold another budget workshop with the school board at the end of June so they can make an informed decision when it comes time to vote on the adoption of the budget in July. Okay, so let's look at our revenue. Where does the money come from? We have various sources of revenue. First, there are state revenues. So every year the state sets funding rates. These rates are applied to our enrollment projections to determine estimated funding. The rates are set during the state's legislative session. The legislature just wrapped up their session a few weeks ago, so we are currently finalizing all of our projections. Another type of funding is federal revenue. This type of revenue is primarily from grants from the federal government. Most of these grants are based on the district's poverty level. For example, Title I funding, which can be used for intervention services for students. We've also received numerous DODEA grants from the Department of Defense to support our military population. These federal grants tend to be more restrictive on how we can spend them. They usually come with parameters that we must follow. Another type of federal funding is impact aid. Many of you hopefully are very familiar with impact aid because every October, the district sends out surveys to families to support the number of military connected students that we have. This impact aid funding is a direct result of those surveys, which underscores the importance of completing them. The third major type of funding we have is local funding. This is primarily our local tax collections, otherwise known as our voter approved levy. We run a replacement levy every 4 years. We last ran one in February of 2020, and our next replacement levy is scheduled for February of 2024. The levy is a critical portion of our funding that funds various important programs, including what you see here. Next, let's review expenditures. So where does the money go? So first, schools are funded first. There should be no surprise there because that is our top priority, schools. School funding is based on enrollment of that particular building, as well as any special needs they may have. After schools are funded, the remaining dollars are stretched to meet all other needs, which are the district support services for our schools. Let's talk briefly about our mandatory requirements. So these are things that we really don't have much of a choice on how we spend the money. For example, for equity purposes, enrollment is going to determine the amount of basic staff at a building. If you have this many first graders, you'll have this many first grade teachers and so forth. We also have various employee groups, each with their own contracts that are collectively bargained. We are required by law to adhere to the requirements of these employee contracts. Then there are special education requirements. So special education students each have their own IEP, or individualized education program. We must direct dollars to fulfill the requirements of each IEP. Then there are the operations of the district. Listed are a few examples. We are required to get the students to and from school. We are required to feed the students. We must maintain our facilities to keep a safe and clean learning environment. And of course, health, safety, and security are things we cannot ignore. So here's a brief overview on school budgets. So every school gets a baseline budget based on the number of students they have. Then on top of that baseline budget, an additional budget is provided to those schools with higher need. A few examples of the additional funding are listed here. So here's an example of how individual schools are budgeted. We have two schools listed here, Tyee Park Elementary and Beechwood Elementary. You'll see that they have very similar student enrollment numbers. However, you'll see that these two schools have vastly different free and reduced rates. The free and reduced rate is a poverty measure. Tyee Park's poverty population is 81%, while Beechwood's rate is only 31%. So you can see that Tyee Park receives an additional 5 staff members from title and LAP funding, and this funding is provided based on poverty metrics. And you see Beechwood only receives 1 additional staff member from this funding. You also see that Tyee Park is provided with a multi-language learning staff person because of their higher population of multi-language learners. On the other side of things, Beechwood has 5 additional special education staff members to support its higher special ed population programming. Now I'll turn it over to Leanna Albrecht, our district's communication person, and she'll go through the thought exchange survey.
Next. Oh, thank you. All right, so as Executive Director Hart shared, what has been our standard practice is we've had budget workshops in person in the past. And what we found is, those haven't been well attended, and especially after COVID, as people are getting back to in-person engagement, etc., we're looking for ways to enhance and support strong decision-making in the school district and increasing public participation. So in addition to the March 7th and 21st budget workshops, we've launched something new and different, and that is an opportunity to engage our stakeholders across the board, and that is using what's called Thought Exchange. And so with Thought Exchange, we posed that question to gather from stakeholders, what are the most important things, whether it's programs, resources, supports, that are important for the district to consider as we're developing our budget for next school year. So it gave us an opportunity for community members, whether you're a student, staff, retiree, to share your individual thoughts. And then it gave other individuals the opportunity to rate those thoughts. So what it's done is it gave us an opportunity to see what is top of mind for our stakeholders as we develop the budget. We're proud to say that 243 individuals participated in our first thought exchange, and it's given us some valuable information. Next. So you can see here, oh, thank you. These were the top thoughts that came through. And you'll notice here too, this word cloud. I really like the word cloud because it shares with you some of the top thoughts that are on people's mind, whether it's safety, class size, behavior, health, interventions, mental health support, the academics. But the top 3 thoughts that came through were safety and security. So ensuring students have a safe learning environment, and that means a broad range of things. Class sizes, making sure we're keeping class sizes as small as we can, and then also resources to classrooms. So those were the top 3 thoughts that have come through. Next slide. And then just to show you how Thought Exchange rates these things for you, you'll see here, this was the actual thought shared, top thought that was ranked number 1 out of all of participants was safety for our students while they're at school. So our kids feel safe at school, and then of course down to resources and support. This information is available on our district website if you'd like to look through that on our budget workshop news story. So we've been very impressed with the opportunity with Thought Exchange, and we'll look to expand on those opportunities to gather input and involve our community so we can make the best decisions as possible. And at the end of the presentation, we'll also have an opportunity for additional involvement. Give it back to Craig.
Thank you, Leanna. So let's look at our preliminary projected revenue for next year. You'll see the big piece in red of nearly $132 million. That represents our state general purpose funding, otherwise known as our basic ed funding. In dark green of $50 million is our state special purpose funding. This is where you're going to find your special ed funding or your LAP funding, as well as your multilingual funding. In brown of $44 million is our federal funding. So again, this includes things like our title grants, as well as our federal special ed funding. Also included here is our impact aid dollars. So in light green, you'll see $24 million. So that's our local funding, otherwise known as our voter approved levy. And you'll see at the bottom right, we are projecting the total operating revenue of over $254 million. Okay, so now let's look at how the budget reflects the community's priorities. First, safety and security, as Leanna had mentioned. We have substantially increased our budget for mental health, especially since the pandemic hit. For example, we have more than tripled our budget for Greater Lakes mental health counseling services. Also, between nurses and counselors on staff, the district is funding an additional 16 positions that the state does not provide funding for. We also have added 5 additional campus supervisors to enhance school safety. And we have ongoing plans to make capital improvements to our grounds and buildings to support safety at the schools.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. Is that happening now, or is that projected for 2020?
Both.
Okay.
So next, smaller class sizes. There are various class sizes depending on the grade level. The class size is actually a legally bargained rate that is negotiated with the Teachers Association. However, it is the district's current practice to provide staff beyond the negotiated class sizes. And as we showed in our school example, schools with higher needs are provided additional staff. And the community's third priority, resources to classrooms. We are increasing our career and technical education staff at a couple of secondary schools. We are providing social emotional learning curriculum at our schools. The board recently approved a new social studies curriculum, and OSPI is providing grants to some of our higher needs schools. Okay, so now the fun part. Now that you're done listening to me, for those in the room, we're going to ask you to have some conversations at your table, and we're going to have you write down a couple things. So your top suggestions for the district budget priorities, as well as any additional questions you may have. Before we start that though, we will be doing another survey, and the link is here, but this link will also be posted on the district website. Right.
Do you have questions before we get started? Yes.
Yeah. So by using the Thought Exchange, that's an online platform.
Yes.
Does that leave out certain groups of people?
It can for accessibility. And so when we do our in-person, we're trying to connect that way as well. So we're looking at ways to kind of grow and improve. And we do welcome suggestions on how we can reach our more marginalized families and underrepresented families. So we welcome that as well.
And is Thought Exchange just in English, or is it available in other languages?
You can translate, it will translate the survey, the experience into multiple languages that are supported by Google. And the nice thing is then it will translate it back into English for us to process. So that multi-language responses are worked into the overall platform. So that's lovely too. So we don't have to take those extra steps of translating. Yes.
Did you say Thought Exchange was published in the newsletter?
Thought
The opportunity to your input was in the newsletter?
It was shared with families through the weekly message. The link wasn't put in the printed newsletter because of the timing that it went out. So we didn't have that opportunity, but we also pushed it out through news release and web story and to our families as well.
Yeah, I appreciated the chance to take the thought exchange survey. Thought it covered a lot of space. Okay, it went through a lot of things. I think that when I read the analysis, okay, the data that was there, that I was curious as to if you just look at the student input in this, I think the students were 10% of the respondents or so, that was there anything that came out different, prioritizing thing than when you lumped everyone together as staff and community members and
I don't have it in front of me, so I'd have to take a look at that piece, but those are elements that we're looking at right now too, as we're processing as an administration, is the feedback that was provided. And we added that extra step in to have individuals identify how they're connected. So I think it's given us an extra layer of information to process.
yeah, because I do think that students would appreciate seeing how their input got utilized in terms of making some decisions in the budget, even if it's prioritizing a little bit of money to go towards student things, if there is in fact some things that students saw that folks like me in the community didn't see.
Yeah, it's a different lens. It's an important lens too. Another question before we get started in our table group conversations. Yeah.
I had a question about the additional CTE staff at Lockbourne and Clover Park, which are two of the schools that have the higher percentages of students of color, and which CTE programs you're targeting there to increase.
I guess I walked in at the right time. We are expanding esports, which is a program to teach kids how to do online gaming, but also computer technology. And then we're expanding our robotics program that up until now, we only had a 0.5 FTE of career and technical ed at Lockbourne. And we saw this as an opportunity to expand their offerings. So we added 1.5 FTE of career and technical ed staffing there to make this a 2.0 position. In addition, we fund our science teachers out of career and technical ed in 7th and 8th grade as well. So there's actually more than 2 FTE at Lockbourne. There's another 2, so closer to 4, because our science teachers are out of career and technical ed as well.
I would just really, particularly at those schools, encourage you to look at high wage, high demand careers for CTE pathways.
So we're focused on medical, construction engineering, computer science, and of course I will forget the 4th little bucket.
Yes. I saw it on Monday night.
It's on a wall in my office. Anyway, all right. But there's a 4th area, which are combined. The career technical ed program here has an advisory board that they meet with fall and spring, and then the individual areas meet with them in winter. So we do go over workforce data. We look at that in the fall. We look at that in the smaller groups in the winter, and then we look at that again in the spring. We make decisions around those career entries. We've been working closely with Boeing, so aerospace manufacturing is a program at Lakes, and then we do construction manufacturing, which is at Clover Park High School, using Boeing's curriculum Core Plus, and then we've just been in talks with. They aren't CHI Franciscan anymore. The Virginia Mason Franciscan, the big mergers of hospitals. So we've been talking to them They are interested in doing some more support with us. And then we're in pretty good contact with Clover Park Technical College. They have a mechatronics program, which is really about robotics, right? And the use of those at the Boeing plant. We're trying to streamline students through that kind of programming, as well as nursing, dental assistant, right? Some of the programs that are over at Pierce College. Those are kind of the goals. If come to me on that fourth little bucket, I'm just watching my office and say, what's the fourth bucket on the wall there?
Brad, isn't it natural resources?
Yes, thank you, Carol. Look at you. She paid attention to the board meeting on Sunday. That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. So as we get started, you'll notice too, we've got two sheets on the wall there. So we've got some stickies for you. So as you have these conversations, we'd love to get your thoughts specifically on what are some additional input on priorities. We've had a couple great ones that you just shared out with us in the Q&A part, but if we could add those up here, just pick them up on there as you think of those after your table conversations, and then what additional questions or what additional information can we be providing to support the process. So we'll let you guys have some conversations. Then we've got some